The story of drug empires is older than you might think, and it started long before the modern pharmaceutical industry even existed. When we look back at the economic giants that shaped world power, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Nations rise and fall, but drug empires just keep reinventing themselves. Even when they seem to die, they quietly reappear stronger, richer, and more global than before. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize that the way power is built today isn't so different from the past. In fact, it's almost the same playbook, just with better branding. But first of all, leave a comment below telling us which country you're watching this video from, just so I know how far the message is reaching. It all starts with something deceptively simple. Humans have always wanted substances that make life feel better, longer, or easier. Sometimes those substances heal, sometimes they numb pain, and sometimes they create it. But the truth is, drug empires don't grow because people are weak. They grow because the people who control the supply know exactly how to turn human needs into global money pipelines. Once that pipeline is built, no government in history has ever fully shut it down. That brings us to the East India Company. Today, most people think of it as a powerful trading company, maybe even a colonizer. But very few understand the scale of what it actually was. The world's first corporate drug empire, and not a small one. At its peak, it controlled more territory, more revenue, and more military power than many nation-states today. It had its own private army, its own tax system, and a monopoly over products that shaped global trade. The most profitable of those products was not spices, not tea, but opium. The company manufactured it in India, shipped it to China, and forced open markets through military power when China tried to stop the addiction crisis devastating its people. When you look at this history through a financial lens, something becomes clear. The East India Company discovered a business model so profitable that versions of it still exist today. First, find a substance people depend on. Second, control the supply. Third, use political influence to maintain that control. And fourth, expand faster than regulators can respond. Back then, the drug was opium. Today, the substances are backed by laboratories, patents, and billion-dollar marketing campaigns. But the mechanics da money systems look disturbingly familiar. What makes these empires so resilient is that they don't rely on a single CEO or even a single country. They operate through networks. When one piece collapses, the rest adapts. When governments try to fight them, the empires just change their appearance. In the 19th century, they looked like ships filled with chests of opium. In the 21st century, they look like research labs, supply chains, and prescription pads. But the business logic has always been the same. Create demand, monopolize supply, and build legal structures that make the system difficult to challenge. One of the clearest examples of this transition is the global painkiller boom of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. For decades, drug manufacturers insisted their products were safe, non-addictive, and essential for modern life echoing. The exact same arguments the East India Company made 200 years earlier. The tools had changed. The messaging had changed, but the underlying pattern was identical. A substance designed to numb pain became a financial engine so powerful that stopping it became almost impossible. And just like in the 1800s, the fallout wasn't only economic. It shaped families, communities, and entire generations. But here's where the story gets even darker. Drug empires don't just survive because they have money. They survive because they embed themselves into the systems we all rely on: healthcare systems, political systems, international trade, and even the cultural narratives about what it means to be healthy. When a system becomes too big to fail, it doesn't matter how many documentaries are made or how many lawsuits are filed. The engine keeps running because too many institutions depend on it. Look at patents. A modern drug empire doesn't need ships or armies. It needs exclusive rights to a molecule. That single patent can generate billions because it transforms a scientific discovery into a private revenue stream protected by law. If the company can extend that patent through clever reformulations, marketing strategies, or political lobbying, the river of money keeps flowing. And as long as humanity continues to age, hurt, fear, and hope, demand never dries up. The irony is that many drugs genuinely help people. Many save lives. But empires are never built on compassion alone. They're built on the ability to turn science into dependence. Not always physical dependence, but financial, political, and systemic dependence too. Once a society becomes reliant on a single industry to keep its hospitals running and its patients alive, reform becomes too complicated for most governments to risk. That's why drug empires never really die. They just change uniforms. They move from colonial companies to multinational corporations, from military-backed trade routes to patent-protected supply chains, from forced imports to highly persuasive advertising, and from physical war to legal and political influence. What appears to be evolution is actually continuation. To understand the power of modern pharmaceutical giants, you have to understand the history that shaped them, because these companies didn't emerge from nowhere. They grew from a world already trained to depend on substances that promise relief. A world where profit and pain have always been deeply connected. And that brings us to the real secret of drug empires. They thrive not because people are helpless, but because the business model itself is perfectly designed to survive across centuries. As long as demand exists, someone will rise to supply it. If one empire falls, another fills the vacuum. If one product is banned, a new one is invented. The story we're living today isn't new. It's just the latest chapter in a 500-year-long tale of substances, power, and profit. The real turning point in understanding why drug empires never die comes when you realize that most of their biggest battles aren't fought in secret rooms or underground markets. They're fought in plain sight. They happen in courtrooms, conference halls, academic institutions, and regulatory agencies. The headlines may show scandals, fines, and investigations. But behind each public drama lies something much bigger. An economic machine that countries depend on far more than they're willing to admit. Think about this. In many major economies, pharmaceutical companies are among the largest contributors to research funding, employment, exports, and healthcare innovation. Governments rely on them. Universities rely on them. Millions of patients rely on them. And once reliance becomes part of the national infrastructure, the power dynamic shifts. Regulation becomes negotiation, oversight becomes partnership, and any attempt to truly dismantle the system becomes a threat not just to companies, but to entire economies. This is exactly what made the East India Company so impossible to stop. It wasn't just a corporation, it was the backbone of the British economy. Removing it would have caused financial collapse. And so the Crown protected it, even when the consequences were catastrophic for others. Today, the same pattern repeats, but in boardrooms instead of palaces. Financial dependence creates political protection. Political protection creates market dominance. Market dominance creates global influence, and global influence creates the next evolution of the empire. But here, as something most people never think about. Drug empires, don't only manipulate supply. They manipulate identity. They shape the way cultures think about illness, age, pain, and happiness. They define what is normal, what is treatable, and what requires lifelong medication. Once a culture accepts those definitions, everything else becomes automatic. People seek treatments. Doctors prescribe them. Insurance companies reimburse them. And the system strengthens itself. This cycle is powerful because it doesn't require force, it requires belief. The East India Company used cannons. Modern drug empires use narratives. And narratives are far harder to fight. For example, The rise of lifestyle medications created a new kind of consumer, a person who is not sick, but could be healthier. The moment drugs became associated not only with treatment, but with optimization, the customer base expanded from the sick to the entire population. This shift didn't happen accidentally. It was carefully designed through advertising, medical journals, and public campaigns that reframed health as a constant pursuit rather than a natural state. This transformation didn't just expand markets, it normalized dependence. Dependence on daily pills, dependence on scheduled checkups, dependence on pharmaceutical solutions for problems that sometimes have non-chemical solutions. But dependence is profitable, and profit ensures survival. What's even more fascinating is how these empires evolve during crises. When pandemics hit, when wars break out, when economies collapse, drug empires rarely weaken. They often become stronger. The demand for treatment spikes. Governments pour billions into development. Emergency authorizations bypass years of regulation. And companies emerge from the crisis with unprecedented leverage. Every global health emergency is also, quietly, a global business pivot. But before we blame corporations alone, we must recognize the other half of the equation: human nature. People want solutions, and they want them fast. When someone is in pain, they don't think about geopolitics. When a loved one is sick, they don't care about supply chains. They want help. And drug empires exist because they provide something that societies desperately need: relief. Relief from suffering. Relief from fear. Relief from uncertainty. And when relief becomes a commodity, the sellers become indispensable. The result is a world where drug empires don't just survive, they shape the future. Their influence extends into artificial intelligence, biotechnology, genetic editing, and longevity research. The companies of tomorrow won't just produce pills. They'll engineer the chemistry of aging. They'll design personalized treatments for individuals based on DNA. They'll develop drugs that slow or reverse the biological clock. And when that happens, the power imbalance will widen even further, because the empire that controls the science of aging controls the most valuable resource on Earth: time. This brings us to the final, uncomfortable truth. Drug empires never die because society doesn't actually want them to. We criticize them, regulate them, expose their scandals, but we still rely on them. We demand innovation. We demand cures. We demand miracles. And as long as those demands exist, someone will step forward with a solution and a price tag. History doesn't repeat itself by mistake. It repeats itself because the conditions that created the first drug empire never disappeared. They simply evolved. The East India Company used gunships. Modern empires use patents, but both were built on the same foundation: human vulnerability, economic opportunity, and the relentless pursuit of profit. And so the cycle continues. Every century produces a new version of the same story. Every generation believes the system has changed, and every time the empire adapts faster than anyone expects. The truth isn't that drug empires never die. It is that we keep rebuilding them again and again, because the world is designed in a way that makes them almost impossible to replace. Thanks for watching.